Welcome to the Stay at Work Home. We are here to question the prevailing assumptions about the meaning of life, work, and the purpose of people. Instead of being torn apart by our vocations, we want to be pulled together. Come along with us as we change our picture of the good life and pursue the home as God intended, one that worships through work together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Stay at Work Home. I am Keith.
I'm Becky.
And we are Keith and Becky.
Stay at Work Home.
Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about what is really the kind of the financial foundation, the bottom of the pyramid, if you will, for our stay at home mobility.
Okay.
Which a lot of people don't have.
Right.
A lot of people would love to stay home, and they can't. Becky, why can't we? Because we crazy.
You're crazy.
But why can't we really?
Because a couple of your crazy ideas turned into a mortgage payment.
Or double. Occasionally
mortgage.
more than double
Yeah.
mortgage payment.
Yeah.
And the mortgage payment's not small.
Right.
Because we have a large acreage property.
Right.
Right. So short-term rentals is what we're talking about. You might know that as Airbnb
Or
STR.
STRs.
Because really you do want to do things besides just Airbnb, which we might talk about that later.
Yeah.
But the reason that we started was, and we're arguing about this before we started recording, was I think financial desperation. And Becky thinks to give her sister a job.
Oh, no.
No?
No.
No, what were you saying?
Although giving
I didn't understand.
my sister a job, actually, no, we had to totally
We're like,
lasso her into that.
twist her arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way,
She
super
did a great
grateful,
job.
dear sister, if
She
you're
did a very good job.
listening, you're amazing.
I'm sure she's listening to every episode.
Yeah, maybe so. But I think actually the real reason that I could get behind your insane ideas, which you might have a few of those, idea is a 4-letter word, if anybody hadn't noticed, especially around here, was because when we first moved to our first duty station in the U.S., where we had to we were aiming to figure out our own housing, we needed some time between when we could buy a house. Well, basically look for a house and buy a house. Like closing on a house, by the way, doesn't happen in like 2 minutes.
No,
well, actually, it did once when we were selling a house, but that's a whole other story. Depending on the market. But in this particular circumstance, it happened in 3 weeks, which was at the time actually really fast.
Yeah.
But we were first-time home buyers. It was relatively low. We had a stable income. Like all the things worked together to get lending pretty easily.
Yep.
But
it
still,
was really hard to find a place where you could come into town and have a dog.
We had 2 dogs and we had a child, and we didn't want to stay in a hotel. We cook. We had, not just a child. We had we moved when our oldest was 3 weeks old. By the time we got to where we were going, just 5 weeks old. So the hotel living thing was not even remotely a possibility. But that's what most military families deal with. And
so what we did do was we found somebody who was kind of off the grid, but off. It was like an hour away in Stedman, right?
We looked all over.
We found someone desperate enough to be flexible enough for us to let us have our dogs and live there for a while, but it wasn't a good situation. Right. And then my friend Damien ended up saying, hey, he was single, and it was a single wide or double wide? Probably single wide. I don't even remember what it was. Out of the country, and he said, just come on.
All I remember was
we were like, thank you. And we went there.
Of things he collected.
What did he collect?
Lots of weapons.
He did have a lot of guns.
I was glad my infant was an infant, not a toddler. But anyway, I actually shot my first gun there. Actually,
unless you're the ATF, in which case I'm sure Damien has no guns. He hates guns.
We won't say your last name, Damien.
That's right.
But actually, so this is interesting to think about a little bit, because at that point in time, this was roughly 2000. Well, it was 2008, actually,
which was a terrible time to buy a house. April 2008, we got at the peak.
Yeah,
that's a whole other conversation.
God was really kind to us and all the way it all worked out in the long run.
Yeah.
But at the time, so 2008, Airbnb was non-existent, or if it was existent, it wasn't existent in the whole country. So we never heard of it.
It was not a thing for us.
But VRBO, which we had never heard called Verbo. What?
Wasn't a thing, yeah.
But VRBO was a thing. And that's where we would often look to find a place to stay when we traveled at that point in time. Well, So that's I think where we found that particular guy who said he had a furnished house.
Really?
Yes, the guy in Stedman. Yes, and I think so.
That's right. He said he had a furnished house, and we got there, and it was like
there was a mattress on the floor. There were no beds. There was no kitchen.
It was awful.
It was bad.
It was really bad.
It was. I mean, I guess we could have given him ratings, but it was such a weird thing anyway that it was.
Yeah, it was all new.
Anyway, we lived there for a week. Thankfully, we were able to get somewhere else. Thank you, Damien, again. But edit.
Yeah, leave that in.
But the need was there. There was a great need, actually, for that. And that actually, if I'm honest, I thought about that often. I thought about how, well, even when Isaac moved to town, when my brother moved to town, it was, even for a single guy, it wasn't pleasant. Who wants to live in a hotel for a while? Nobody wants to.
No bueno.
And also, the military compensates you relatively well. So if you can find an inexpensive place to stay or a place where you can cook your own meals,
you bank.
You can actually make a good bit of money just by doing that. So that was actually our first kind of, it's like STR flipped on its head, is that when we would move, we would make money by
not spending.
We did that all the time with our military life. Right, we were really cheap. So when did we start our own first?
Okay, so that house that we bought, we lived there for 2.5 years.
Yeah, almost three.
And then we got our first place out in the country, where we raised 2 and tried to raise a 3rd litter of pigs. That's a whole other story as well.
I'll save that for another podcast.
Yeah, we had some.
I thought you were saying kids, but we did raise 2 little bitty kids.
We did raise some little bitty kids.
We had the third.
And then they pulled.
No, I mean children.
Okay, those 2. So we were in, okay, Fayetteville area, right? So we moved to the country, and I had heard of the people say, when you're in the military, the Army's paying you really more than your mortgage, your basic allowance for housing. At the time, I was really optimistic, and I was like, well, that's way more money than you actually spend on your house. Of course, by the time you do home maintenance and stuff, it's not. Newsflash, right? But what I had heard was that, get somebody to rent your house when you move. Don't sell it. Rent it, and just every time you move, rent it. By the time you get out of the Army, you've got a whole other retirement of rental income.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Add it.
It was really hard for me to conceptualize even the thought of buying a house. When we first were in the military, we lived on base, and we got loaner furniture, which was awesome. It was overseas, so we lived our best life then. Actually,
it was pretty fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, U.S. People, for paying for our 2-year honeymoon in Europe.
That was nice.
But I thought, I know, most military duty stations, you're only there for 3 years, usually at most. I mean, occasionally you can double that, but even still, I grew up in the same house from the time I was 5 until I left home and was married, and which wasn't that much older than 5. Anyway, it was a little bit older than 5.
She was 19 when we got married. Way older than 5.
Way older than 5. But when we were, I was really hesitant to even want to buy a house in Fayetteville to start with.
Why?
So, because it was scary to take on a huge chunk of debt. 6 figures worth of debt was
$130,000.
At that point in my life, I'm a whopping 22 years old, I think, at this point.
Big deal.
And the concept, we never even let our credit cards go more than, we paid it at the end of the month. We just did those to get the points. He even had to, twist my arm to be willing to get a credit card to begin with. And so the idea of buying a house was just mind-boggling.
But we did it.
And I understood. Once we did it, I had to trust him. I had to trust that people buy houses as investments, and it's not just your housing.
No.
It's housing looking towards the future. But I couldn't see the whole future, but I had to trust somebody a little bit.
Yeah. It's better than renting. I'm not going to say that it's great, because you're paying probably more over the mortgage for interest than you are for the house, but that also is a whole nother episode. So it was the best thing we could have done. We bought one, and then I had heard these guys that just continue to rack up houses and put them up for rent when they left for the next duty station.
And a lot of people don't want to buy a house, so the market for rentals is really good in the military
zone. Yeah,
and for regular old long-term rental.
all over now. They are
Mhm.
still really good, not just in military towns. But we did the long-term rental thing. I can't remember. We had 2 renters in a span of 6 years.
Oh, no.
No, it wasn't that long, was it?
Like 2.5 years.
Was it that short? Man.
That felt like a long time, but
It did feel like a long time. It wasn't that long. But what had happened was...
No, it was... I'm sorry. The first one was 2.5 years. And then
The second
the bad timing of when she had to leave our house was when we had the other mortgage and we were paying rent when we moved.
So that's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
So
we had another one after that.
We are moving to Korea. I'm doing instructor pilot course en route. Mm-hmm. And at that time, Congress passed a bill that caused Fayetteville, North Carolina to get gutted of a lot of people that we all expected to be there for a long time. It was the civilian employees of the Army and the Air Force, for that matter.
We call them permanent party.
Permanent party people, civilians, retired folks that had jobs there. And all of a sudden, a bunch of them had to leave. Like our church lost people. It was wild.
They were no longer permanent.
At the same time, the Army opened up more new on-post housing, further gutting the local real estate market. So we couldn't sell. Our house was worth probably $40,000 less than we paid for it. This is in 2013, so it was way past like the bottom of the great financial crisis. But because of the sequestration, look back and look up the Gang of Eight and all this stuff, if you don't remember it, this thing happened and military spending got cut. That caused us to be in a pickle. We had the house payment from the rental that we first lived in, our first purchase. We had the house payment of the country house that we bought and lived in for 2 years, 2.5 years, 2 years, just 2 years, I think, which we loved.
We loved, but it wasn't selling quickly.
And we were getting drug away from that because we were having to go to Korea. So in a bit of a moment of desperation, we looked into short-term rental, Airbnb, and it just so happened to be that Becky's sister and her husband were getting stationed at Fort Bragg because all of Becky's siblings and their significant others want to be like me. So they joined the Army. Okay, maybe that's a stretch. But they did join, 2 of them.
Well, we had 3 siblings live with, 3 of our siblings lived in Fayetteville. Yeah. We didn't overlap with Abby, but it did happen.
Yeah.
So
at that point, out of desperation, financial desperation,
we had no easy option.
And we were paying for somewhere to live in Alabama while I was at the instructor pilot course. So we were paying for 3 dwellings for a little while. And like the day we got on the plane to go to Korea, what did we do? We sold one house. We rented one house.
There are funny other bits.
And then we left. Yeah, too many details. Can't do it. Okay, so
fast forward a little bit.
Fast forward.
We were willing, like at that point, the long-term rentals also didn't. They were good, and then they break even. They paid the mortgage, so when things were good and there was no maintenance, a long-term rental paid the mortgage, basically. Which
racked up equity. So you're looking at like 40-50% of the money that's coming in is going to your equity.
Things like they're paying. Good. Yes, that's good. And also in a time that we couldn't sell, like there just was we would lose money to sell. Then we were able to just kind of coast on that. But anytime there was maintenance to do, and anytime there was a gap between tenants, which only happened once, but it was a long enough gap and a bad enough time that it really
it put us in a tight spot.
It made me want to go to long-term rentals. And also a big difference, and this is really my motivation for lots of things with our short-term rentals, is that after you have a tenant leave, even if they were great tenants, which we did have great tenants in some ways, weren't demanding, there's a lot of recovery from a tenant. You don't go from a long-term tenant that's been there for 2.5 years to a new tenant
in a day.
You don't go there in a week. Sometimes I think it took us a couple of months.
Sometimes you don't go there in a month or 2.
You got to paint. You usually have to do some repair on a floor, and you might have to replace one piece of the appliances, things like that. And
we had good tenants.
We did. We
Both
had really
of our
good
tenants were pretty good.
But it really did make me rethink if I ever have to rent again. You think you're bugging your landlord by saying, "Oh, this drawer is getting a little bit wonky." Bug your landlord, because it is a kindness to let them know about the issues ahead of time. Maybe bug them in a way that tells them, this isn't bothering me, but you need to know. All right. Actually, that applies to all tenants of anything rental ever. It is not harmful to your landlord to tell them there's a problem. It is harmful for you not to tell them there's a problem. It
helps them to preserve their asset.
So we are getting to this point where we have to find a different solution because the long-term rentals are not, they're burdensome. We're far away. We can't
We were also
manage
going
it
to
well.
be losing money per month just to get anybody in there.
At that point in time, things had shifted in the economy, and the military people weren't even our tenants anymore because the military, or even military related, I think that the second gal we had in was a professor at a local university. And so the cost of living or the what they could afford was much lower. Inflation, all that mess in those years. So
short-term rental go from barely making the mortgage to not even making the mortgage to getting double or more the mortgage by doing short-term rental. And when a tenant moves out, and they move out every few days, you can have somebody else in within hours because it doesn't get that bad. And you've got a professional cleaner in there every few days to get things straight. Or you're doing it yourself and you become a professional cleaner.
Or your sister does it for you.
And the definition of professional cleaner is a cleaner who gets paid money to clean.
Right. Yes. So, and then, I mean, there's an upstart expense to a rental, a short-term rental that isn't there with a long-term rental. You're paying a lot of different things.
If you're talking about a furnished, you're talking about a furnished short-term rental versus unfurnished long-term rental.
Right. And short-term rentals also, you're not just furnishing, you're furnishing and you're providing linens. You're providing utilities, all utilities.
And if you're providing linens, that means you're providing yourself or someone a whole lot of washing machine and dryer usage.
Laundry. Yeah. So it's a risk you take, but we decided to go ahead and launch out. Now, when we first started our STR life, our actual goal wasn't super short term. Our initial goal rewinded back to what my desire was to provide this in-between place, right?
Right.
Most military
we wanted
families
to have when we first got there.
Right. Most military families, they don't just need a couple nights. They need 3 to 6 weeks. That is very common for a family to live a little bit displaced as they're moving in for 3 to 6 weeks. And they need a kitchen and they need enough room for the kids to play outside and things like that. And they need a spot. They don't need to be kennel animals. They don't need to leave animals with it was a priority to us. By the way, I don't like animals. It's kind of a funny thing, but I also really hated having to think about what we were doing with these dogs when we traveled. And it was so nice anytime we could find a rental that would let them. So we had hardwood floors in that particular place. That's actually easier, by the way, in case anybody didn't think about that. It's a lot easier to have hardwood floors with animals. And we allow animals and we had a fenced in backyard. So we went ahead and we braved it. We launched that. And our first tenant was a gem, actually. She ended up being a travel nurse, which, by the way, is yet another field of need. Tons of people. If you live in an area with a lot of hospitals, I think of immediately Winston-Salem, where there's a ton of good quality hospitals that have your higher level of research and things like that going on in that area. You're going to have a lot of influx of people who are just there from six weeks to 3 months. And so our very first tenant was a 6-weeker. Yep. And she was great. She's very communicative. One of the downsides, if you have a little bit longer one, is that you're not in there all the time. But she's a single gal. I think she had, maybe she wasn't single, but it was just a couple living there. And I think they did have an animal, but they were, we didn't vet them heavily, but it was still relatively new in the Airbnb thing. And there's a lot of communication going on. If we sent a message, it would be replied to. If they sent a message, it would be replied to by us very quickly.
It's not like somebody comes in there to inspect it once a year.
Right.
Very different situation.
So that ended up very quickly being a very good experience. Her payment for that first 6 weeks covered, I don't remember numbers per se, but it definitely covered the mortgage. And it covered what it cost us to get it started in all the furnishings and things that we needed to put in there. So we saw in that very first tenant, okay, this is a game changer. This is definitely a different scenario. But do you remember some downsides to that?
No.
Not at all.
I only remember the good things.
Do you ever hear, well, I actually don't hear the Airbnb app like I used to. The Airbnb app, was the only one we used at the time, had a tone.
Yeah.
Had a notification sound.
And whenever we would hear it, it was like,
my blood pressure would go up when I would hear that tone. Because because we weren't there.
Yeah.
And so for a little while, my sister, we were out of town. So a lot of people, you'll see like HGTV shows talking about, buying your vacation home and then renting it out most of the year. But you basically...
There's a giant spider on the floor.
There is a giant spider. But
I can switch it for you.
Oh, you got it. I'm like, not afraid of spiders. I'm gonna... Hey, do I get a drink for that? Hold on.
Take a sip.
Are you gonna edit the sips?
Maybe.
One of the biggest downsides to so the vacation, like a vacation home, like say you want a house on the beach because you love this particular beach, you want to go back there every year.
You are not there.
You're not there all the time, but in those areas, especially if you're going to a high like a attraction place,
high demand travel area,
right? You're gonna have there's gonna be a network of maintainers. You're gonna have a system of maintenance people. You're gonna have a system of reset people that are used to this kind of business.
There are people that can manage it for you. You can do almost nothing.
Yes.
You will not get as much money,
right?
But you're still going to get more money, substantially more money than a long-term rental.
In our early marriage, I watched a lot of HGTV. Like that was actually our earliest marriage was Food Network, and then fast forward to when we started having these rentals, it was HGTV.
And then we started flipping houses.
Yeah.
And you're like using a saw. You feel like a movie star because, like, the movie stars, at least of the 2000.
Just call it out there. We are Chip and Jo. She's just cuter, and you're a little cleaner.
The movie stars of the 2010s for us were Chip and Jo and like that. So we felt like movie stars.
Chip and Jo, if you're listening, you guys rock. Anyway, so the downside of the areas that we had our first two STRs in, which we haven't gotten to the second one yet, but they were both not high traffic for this kind of business at that point. And so in Fayetteville, not tourism.
Yeah.
In Fayetteville in particular, we had my sister for a little while, and it is a burden, and I think it's important for us to talk about the hard parts because it is a burden to have a short-term rental that you may or may not know that it's going to be booked for the night until the day of or the day before. So you can't really plan around it easily. And so we did have a gal after my sister was done, and she was having a baby. She was in the season. She's still very grateful for her starting us out.
Very.
But it didn't last forever.
She even went and bought all of the cute stuff you put in a house.
She did. We're not good at that, actually, personally.
No.
So it was really great to have Abby. But then the next person, I don't remember how we found Wanda. Do you remember how we found Wanda? I don't remember. Anyway, but she had a housekeeping business. So she cleaned houses, not short-term rentals, actually, was not her normal.
This was her first?
This was her first. And actually, no.
Oh, she got more.
We were her favorite, though. She had a party house, actually, which is a whole other can of worms. Definitely still a niche market. Like, there is a place for somebody to own the home that people rent to have huge family gatherings. Just, you have to be prepared and charge a really good cleaning fee because it's going to take a whole lot of time. So we had this gal, but she was having to learn what it meant. She had to shift her schedule very often if we ended up. And if she couldn't do it, we were in a bind. And we had to kind of scrounge around a couple of times for people to cover for her. And we didn't know the quality of their work. And a couple of times it was a little bit sour. One time we had a tenant, and I'm at this time, I'm living in, I think we were here in Illinois when this happened. There was a guy who was in his 60s, I think, that rented from us for 2 or 3 nights. And the batteries on the smoke detector went out. Do you remember that? And the smoke detector was in the dining room, and the ceilings in this teeny tiny little cottage house in the historic homes district in Fayetteville were high enough.
Did we get a Brunson to do that?
We had to have a Brunson do that. So we had to call a former church member, was like, hey, do you have a teenager that would be willing to go provide this emergency service for us? But the stress of this man couldn't sleep because he had a chirp. but he didn't feel comfortable, and nor really should we have
He
felt
didn't want to
comfortable with her
stand on a
climbing
chair,
on a chair.
swap out a 9-volt.
So we had that kind of planted a seed of, should we pay for a professional management company?
Yeah.
But we never went there because they cost a lot of money, actually. They take a lot of your profit
They
margin.
generally will take 20% to manage your property, but you're also losing the cleaning fee.
Right.
But
Keep that.
if you think about it, if it's like $120 a night average, which let's just go with like a 3-bed, 2-bath in a suburban area, you're probably $120 or more per night average. Take 20% off of that, so you're over $95, and your cleaning fee is in addition to that. You're still making pretty good money.
You can still make good money, but we didn't have the margin built.
We didn't have the
into
margin.
that.
We were doing this because we had to some extent. Well, no, we weren't willing to give up the money.
We weren't willing to give the money.
We have been willing to give up some money since.
Yeah.
And maybe that would bring us to nearer things.
Yeah. One more thing from that experience in that particular house.
Okay.
We did actually go the route, not long after that, is when we went the route of, what about this company that shall remain nameless, that this is a third party that provides a service all around the country.
Well, we'll say which one it is.
Okay, Evolve. We'd heard about Evolve, which manages STRs for all kinds of people. And if you ever have booked a place that has Evolve, you'll see it listed. The property is owned by someone, but then Evolve
Is the
hosts
host.
it.
Yeah.
So it's their Airbnb profile, it's their customer service interactions. You as the owner do get varying levels depending on what you decide to pay for. And so we went with them for a little while. And what was really cool-ish at first is they
got so much money.
They jumped our prices like crazy high.
Yeah.
I mean, we would never have paid to stay in what they were charging people to stay in our place.
They sent in
That
a
sounded
professional
good.
photographer to take pictures of our place, and they made it look way, way better than it actually was. And they doubled the nightly rate. And then we got bad reviews.
Because what happens, if you're paying a higher dollar for something and you have really good pictures, and then you can't actually level up to the pictures, and you get these people who expect this kind of service, and you're paying a third party that doesn't actually care a whole lot about.
The thing was that, our cleaning lady, Wanda, she might have told us, or could have told us, that the paint really needed to be redone in the bathroom, but she didn't, and we weren't there to realize that. And Evolve is driving these really great prices, but they're not there either. So nobody was there to really have that hands-on ownership of it to go, okay, we need to spend money on upgrade things. There are also other things you can do to make sure that your high rates you're charging aren't actually going to hurt you and get you bad reviews to make staying in your place a good experience.
We'll talk about this.
We'll talk about that more
later.
in the future.
I guess I'm looking at time. I've spent 30 minutes talking about our first STR.
I kept trying to
I
get
know.
you to just
But
move
there's so
along.
many points to our history and how there is this trail.
Oh,
Okay, so let's fast forward.
okay.
So
Then
that
we're
was
moving to Illinois.
Well, okay, so we moved to Korea. Then we moved
Back
to Georgia.
to Georgia.
Actually, we were in Georgia for 5 years. We bought a house in Georgia about a year and a half before we ended up moving from Georgia. And when we left Georgia, we'll just skip some of the story because it's funny stories.
So we moved again. We had a double wide trailer on 5 acres. It's probably the property that nobody would think to do short-term rental with. And it was like a saving grace to us that we had it, because we were able to get a decent amount of money for that property as a short-term rental. There were a few nightmare things in there. Like the first rental was somebody that came in and just smoked the devil's lettuce up in there. And
She was celebrating her 18th birthday.
yeah.
There were only 2 people, but there were like 6 cars. And every bed, how many beds do we have there?
Every bed was slept in. So
5, 6.
yeah, it was a big party. But overall, the experience was actually not bad, and we did financially come out very good. It moved us. The last whole year, we ended up with the same renter.
Yeah, we got him through Airbnb.
But it was month to month, so it was higher than you would have gotten from a standard long term.
Right. And we could have stuck with Airbnb, but that all happened in COVID. And so, right at the beginning, and, you never know what might occur, but if anybody else was in the season of COVID doing STRs, that they dropped for a little while because there weren't people traveling and nobody knew quite what to do. And he didn't want to leave. So for him, it was beneficial for him to stay, and we were able to negotiate a rate that covered everything for us. We kind of vetted it. Actually, we went in, I went down to kind of clean out a bunch of stuff because what's interesting about our house, our second time, we moved out of that house not expecting to leave forever. We actually thought we were coming back. We were moving into a camper for what ended up being 3 months, and we left. I mean, we got 6 kids at this point. We got a lot of crap. Truthfully, we did. Not super precious crap, but it was crap nonetheless. And we couldn't fit it in a camper, and we didn't need a storage unit. And our initial thing was a friend, we borrowed their camper, they stayed in their house where they were building a house. Anyway.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
that was where that started. But a few months, about halfway through that 3 months, we realized, actually, no, we're really moving to Illinois, and we got to figure out what to do with this house that we hadn't had for very long. And again, the market wasn't great right then. Mm-hmm. That was early COVID when we
It wasn't terrible, but it got much, much better later.
It did.
So it allowed us to bridge. And this is the big thing. If you ever get in the situation where you're forced to sell something, that's really bad. Mm-hmm. If you can have something to bridge you from that moment, from, across that forced sale to the point that you're no longer forced to sell, that will pay massive dividends for you. Anytime you're forced to sell something, you're going to lose a lot. So we got to move from the point where we, would have made some money, but not much, if any, to the point we made pretty good money.
On that house.
We banked
on that double wide on 5 acres.
Yeah.
Our realtor, who's a close friend of ours, said, well, when y'all bought that place, I really didn't think y'all were making a great choice, but you seem to love it. I just didn't think you were going to be able to sell it. But when we went to close it, when we sold it, we were all happy, realtor included. So
Thank you, Rosemary.
Yes. Let us know if you need a realtor in the Atlanta area. So that worked out really well for us.
It could be west of Atlanta.
West of Atlanta, sorry. We don't really do the Atlanta thing. Anyway, well, actually we do that. But anyway, that's a whole other episode. We'll skip that episode.
That was long term.
Man, you're crazy. You know
I'm
that?
crazy.
You're crazy. But he's pulling me along, and then he's like, dadgummit if he doesn't land on his feet just about every time. So
happens.
So we kept that actually as long as it was profitable. And then we're some of those jerks that during the skyrocketing of prices and the low inventory of houses, that's when we banked on our house because we could hold it until it was the most profitable moment.
And then we sold.
We had 5 offers over asking price in 7 hours or 12 hours or something like that after listing the house. Sold and closed in 7 days. Done. Cash money. It was unbelievable. Anyway.
But you might not be in that situation, which is why we need to move to...
Fast forward to our favorite options of STRs.
Yes.
Those 2 still worked out really beneficially for us. Bridge the gap.
They did.
I'm a talker. Why am I a talker?
You really won't shut up. Okay. So...
Would you like me to let you talk?
Let me talk. A little bit. Just a little bit. So, once we were looking at buying our dream house, which our dream house started out as, just this property that was great. And once we saw it, we had to have it. And once we tried to get it, it was really, really, really hard to get it. We were trying to get only a portion of the acreage, not all of it.
I'll have to write a book about this.
Yeah.
It's a funny story.
It's a funny story. Anyway, we got a pre-COVID price and a post-COVID interest rate. You can't beat that. So we got it, but we needed to sell a lot of stuff in the meantime to make it happen because this was more than we would have ever dreamed of spending on a property. But it is the dream property. Like, it's really, really cool. So we did that. We sold the double wide on 5 acres. We made good money on it. We sold some other assets as well, and we went all in. After that, I knew that we needed some kind of backup for when the gravy train stopped, because I was making pretty good money, but I sensed that either I wasn't going to want to do what I was doing forever, or I was going to have to stop doing what I was doing. So one of the things that really was motivating to me was to monetize what we already had. And we had a 50 plus acre property, and we had a house, and we had a barn. So if we were to put a cabin on it, some kind of a short-term rental, we would be using the land we already had, and we're not using, all the woods over there. So if we put a cabin in the woods, it's no loss to us. We could go ahead and start monetizing that and bringing in some money. So we looked at a lot of different solutions for that. One of them,
actually, he might have. He did. I did not. As a matter of fact, he said, we're going to put a cabin up there. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea for 5 or 10 years from now. That's great. We'll save for it.
I'm cranking up the chainsaw.
We can't tell this whole story because the catalyst for it actually happening
was Sherman.
Sherman has songs written about him. But
it's a true story.
You looked at options, though. You were looking at possibilities.
I was. And so one of the possibilities I looked at was a prefab shed to just get that dropped in place and finish it out. And it ended up that we had a gentleman staying with us who I bailed out of jail. But he had a lot of skills. So if you're going to bail somebody out of jail, bail somebody out with a lot of skills. And he's a great guy. Love him.
There's a lot more good story to that. So.
A whole lot of good story. That was our, I guess, maybe my willingness to be extraordinarily hospitable at some point, and you went along with it. And for him, that kind of worked out. So, so many stories.
Implies that with other people it didn't. Perhaps?
Maybe it didn't.
Anyway.
Totally, all the time. But I love people, so just come on, everybody can live in the house. Just kidding.
Don't give them our address. Oh, wait, I did that in the last episode. I was on.
So, because this gentleman was here and had the skills, it was like, well, instead of doing something that's kind of trashy, let's do something that's really awesome. And he was able to do it. And so...
And we had sold the house.
We had some money in the bank. We also had somebody come in and log the property, got some money from that. Mm-hmm. And... I helped him. I was his assistant for 6 months straight, working, 5 or 6 days a week for 6 months straight to build sort of an Appalachian cabin with a loft, 16 by 20. Kind of cool. And it's premium. It's really nice.
Premium but minimalist.
I still say that we've got about $60,000 in it. Becky says it's more. But here's the thing we would probably agree on. If we paid somebody else to do it, there's no way at this point we'd be in for less than $130,000.
Yeah, I think even in our area.
And that's if you're already on the land.
Right. And we do live in some prime real estate area as far as land goes. We're on the wine trail.
It's not. It's cheap.
But it's cheap. But that's more
if you compare nationally.
Right, compared to other places in the country. But for our area, to sell this, if this cabin were on a plot of whatever land we would call it, maybe if we gave it 3 or 4 acres, something like that for that little cabin in itself, we could sell it for a whole, let's just say we could sell it for a whole lot more.
I don't think it would be less than $150,000 right now.
Then we could sell it for twice what we had in it, right? Yeah. And we basically paid for it in cash-ish. In ways, we
creative financing,
there. But that's a note. That's what you got to do. You got to be a little creative with your financing.
A little creative, a little risky. Mm-hmm. Not that risky.
We sold stuff that we weren't using as much.
Yeah.
Or sold the house.
So we got it going.
Yeah.
And it has brought in something like $30,000 a year.
I could do a report on that, but I don't think you want me to do that right now.
That's got to be about dead on. It's about $30,000 a year. And there's, I can
agree on that.
If you were to spend money on getting it built, it would cost you about $130,000, maybe more definitely more in more expensive parts of the United States.
And we've had it on the market now in Airbnb and other
over
places.
2 years.
Over 2 years. So confidently could say at this point it has probably met its investment. It's returned 100%.
Now, with our dumping lots and lots of time and effort into it, It was less than that. It was less than $80,000, and so we're getting something like a 30 to 40% annual return on investment, annual ROI.
Yeah. That's
pretty good. I don't know of a lot of things that you can invest in that you're going to get a constant 30+% return on investment. That's good. So fast forward a little bit.
Only a tiny bit, might we add.
Not that much.
We finished that cabin. We barely had put it, wiped its bottom and put its diaper on. Before
still wet behind the ears.
Still wet behind its ears. My kid's like,
we need another one.
We should do this again. And I'm like,
but it should be cheaper. And it should have a higher return on investment. I ended up talking to David Frazier of Bunky Life, getting involved with him from a business aspect of Bunky Life. And that's why you can go to HarlemBunkies.com, who is the sponsor of this podcast, which also happens to be me and her. So they are producing these quick-to-build, very affordable small cabin kits. And I showed them to Becky, and, idea is a 4-letter word. And I said, Becky, I have an idea.
And
she slapped me.
And I shut down.
I was like, no, look.
This is common. I mean, this happens all the time.
Every day.
I don't often bolster enough strength to pay attention closely because he does this so often. My family members are chuckling as they listen because they know your family members are chuckling. But once I actually got to the point of looking at Bunky Life's website, I was like, really? Like, really? That's how much you paid for it? And I was like, well.
She was impressed with the price.
I guess we can do this.
So we went to Canada 2 weeks later. Probably less than 2 weeks at that point. And we came back trying to figure out how to make things work. And eventually that we did. And then we got our own kit and we built it and made a lot of social media content, started marketing things.
I loved that part.
She hated that part. And
imagine this. All right, guys, let's do this as fast as possible so we can show people that this goes really quickly.
And then every time something funny happens.
That was funny. Let's redo it.
Do it again. Pretend that's happening again.
Or the camera. So if you ever see anything where I look cranky in the video, it's because I was. Because he made me. Because I was already a little cranky, and then he said, "Oh, show me that again." I'm like, ah. Anyway, you're gonna make them see that particular face I just made. You're gonna put that in the thumbnail, aren't you?
Maybe.
I know you.
Maybe.
You love making me look funny.
So then we got it on the market eventually. We took way too long to get it on the market because I was trying to DIY everything. Mm-hmm. And frankly, there's things that you're probably, and I hate to say this because we want to do things, we want to work, but I'm not going to wire it. I'm not going to plumb it. I thought I was going to plumb it, mm-hmm. but I didn't.
There are things that and
we lost a lot of money, but from not going ahead and getting it going.
We can do things now that we couldn't have done then. So it just depends on how quickly you need it to be going, how quickly you need it to be making that return. I think you learn the skills by building. So you can do plumbing that you couldn't have done 3 cabins ago.
Actually, I can't.
Well,
the thing is, I thought I was going to do the copper plumbing stuff that we did, mm-hmm. and because I wanted to do it in copper, because in a bunkie it needs to be exposed, and I thought copper looks cool, so let's do it that way. I still haven't done any copper plumbing, but my plumber has, mm-hmm. and I should have paid him quicker, and I'd be $10,000.
I need more of your external stuff. You have done digging your trenches. There are things that you have done, and you kind of there's some of this that you just can't know until you do, until you try.
Give it a shot. But some of the things, especially on your first one that you do, you probably need to pay somebody else to do it and then help them. Mm-hmm. And bring your kids along and help them. But basically, what was really cool about this is you're talking $30,000 all in on a property that brings in about $20,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And even if you don't do a good job marketing it and launching it at the right time of year and stuff, you're still not going to make much, if any less than $20,000 a year. So you're talking about greater than a 50%, right? 65+% ROI even if you don't nail it, I don't know any realm in which that kind of a return on investment is considered a failure. But I would say that with this particular product, less than 50% is a total failure. Like you've done something totally wrong, or you just don't have it available all the time or something. Like you've just chosen not to make as much money as you could with it. But that's what we did next. We added that one, and it's done well. So now that we have 2 of those on the property, the dream property that we already were living on, it's monetized. I don't have to worry about making the house payment so much. And it also happened that this capability was given to us for hospitality and to kind of share the wealth a little bit, right? So at the same time that we added our second short-term rental, our second STR, a friend of ours needed the work. So we passed off the resets, the cleaning and getting everything ready for the next guest to her. And she's still doing that now. When she can't do it, we do it. But it was an ability that we didn't have before that we now had to help somebody else by providing a means of income for them, which is huge. You're providing a means of hospitality for yourself. So if you know that say missionaries coming into town or families coming into town or whatever. The Turkish twins, which you know who you are. They're not really Turkish. That's the funny part. But when they're coming into town, they stay at least one night in one of our cabins because it's a tradition now that's lasted at least 2 years.
When you were selling a high-ticket item of something else we owned.
That's true. Then that guy stayed.
That guy stayed in the cabin while he was testing out the thing.
How many of you have a guest house on your property? That sounds up here, right? For less than $30,000, and really you could do it for less than that, depending on your situation. It could be $10,000 or $15,000. You can do that. You just have to be willing, once again, to do things that some people aren't willing to do. Put the time and effort into it, or have it there. Now, a lot of people have objections to short-term rentals. Oh yeah, the money sounds nice, but I'm not willing to do X, Y, and Z. A lot of times X, Y, and Z aren't what you think they are, or maybe they are, and I could address all those. But what this has allowed us to do is for me to have been home all day today. And even though I was doing work, the kids were able to bug me while I was doing some work that didn't directly involve them. And, my kids have been able to say things like, wow, you're home all the time. It's great, Dad.
And they've been able to, when we first started the cabins, they were helping clean. They had a little bit of income.
And now Martin is getting a little bit of income from going and doing the outside. So he takes a blower out there and broom and
he's a little bit
empties the fire pit of ashes.
He asks
sometimes in the wrong place.
Spot. He asks almost every day if he can go. Do we have any guests in the bunkie today? Do we have any guests in the cabins today? I want to go. Because he'll be our yard maintenance guy, and he's happy to do it, and he does a pretty good job. He's a pretty detailed oriented guy. So it's given them an opportunity to work. It's given them, they see the benefit of this effort that we put in, and that it wasn't. There's a little bit of chaos for a short period of time when we were building. They got to participate in the building. Yeah. Actually, in the building,
the project is huge too. If you actually build your own short-term rental on your own property, that gives them ownership of that.
They have taken. I mean, we let them build the bathroom bunkie sort of by themselves. There's a YouTube video for that if you want to see that. But they did. They do take ownership of it, and there is something about their ability to feel confident that they can produce something of value with their own hands, with their own wits, and Bunkie Bob is a force to be reckoned with. I think that was the case before he built bunkies, but
he's a force to be reckoned with in a different way now.
Yeah. So it provides a family. We're all tied together.
Yeah. It's a mission. It's a purpose other than, let's have family time because family time is good. Mm-hmm. In which we do something, but it's not the thing you're doing that's important. It's family time. Well, now you actually have a mission that draws you together. Mm-hmm. And those big projects are huge. There's probably not a whole lot of 10-year-olds in America that would look at a cabin building project and go, I can do that. I've done it before. I can do it again. But if you do this, you introduce your kids to that. So the idea of you being an entrepreneur, of you being financially independent, maybe of you being wealthy enough to help others, is all of a sudden something that is not prohibitively foreign and difficult in their minds. It's actually an attainable goal, and therefore they're willing to go for it. And they're able to make those decisions and go for it and be that person.
And it's not far away in time either. And I think I'm thinking about that often, is that it's not because we've acquired this certain level of affluence, like the Amish or something. I don't have people drive me. Actually, I do have a 16-year-old drive me around as much as I can let her. But
absolutely,
other than that, we haven't attained this financial boom. But what we have done is we're making our life suit us, and we're making it do what we want it to do rather than being a servant to somebody else's desires for us. And the things that we are building into our life that are feeding our family, literally feeding our mortgage, which hopefully we won't have eventually, but the things that we have to have, we're getting to choose a lot. We have a lot more input on where that comes from and how much time it takes of us, and that we're making sure it builds to the same purposes that our hearts desire it to build towards.
Yeah.
So it's not contradicting. I mean,
if you're working for, let's just throw a company out there, we'll call that company Chevrolet. You might get a lot of money from it, and you're building Chevrolet for somebody else. What we're doing is, for the most part, not building someone else's company, someone else's estate. It's building our stuff. And it's something we want to pass on to our kids, not as a trust fund, but as a platform from which to continue being productive members of society. Mm-hmm. Not something that they're going to leech off of, but something that they're going to continue to produce from and through.
I hadn't processed this until, so you might have to edit this out.
Right
now. But something I'm thinking about is that a lot of times when you get to a point of where you're willing to invest some money into a new investment, so you work the day job for 20 years, and while you're working that, you're accumulating a little extra, and now I've got a little bit of a play money to go invest something in. Well, what's happened now is that if you're at that point that you have that play money, your kids have lived a life that they probably are getting more and more comfortable with the level of income you have at home that is letting them have whatever they want, or at least look like everybody else. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, as far as you being able to give your children what you desire for them to have. But I think there's something valuable, and I guess my dad to some degree taught us this, that there were things worth working for that are not going to actually get you jumped to the top of the financial ladder, but they're going to be worth something you're building the process. Because I would say the thing that we learned from my dad, who worked a ton, who maybe learned a lot of his more business savvy things later when we kids were older. He wishes he had learned some of them earlier so he'd been home more. But he did teach us the value of hard work. And he taught us that what you do matters, like the kinds of work that you do matters. You're not just going to clock in and clock out and call it a day. You're going to clock in and you're going to do the best job you can for the people that you're working for. For him, it was himself. My dad was an entrepreneur, still is, can't stop. I don't think once you are, you ever do get to stop or something. But you're not, I just feel like it's kind of like when you live in your mom's house and your bedroom's a wreck. And part of the reason it's a wreck is because it's not really yours.
I feel a personal indictment here.
So it's going to be a wreck until you move into your own house. And then it might still be a wreck, but you don't want it to be. You actually feel the brunt of it then once it's yours. But when you learn to take ownership earlier of something, I think it builds over time. It builds some characteristics that you just don't. You may just not have the opportunity to see. Your eyes can't be open to possibility. And I think in our kids, oldest to youngest, so our oldest hasn't experienced she wasn't born into an entrepreneurial life.
Yeah, this happened for her later than
the rest of them. And she is less
obviously
likely to take risk in general. She's more like her mama in a lot of ways. But at the same time, even they all have seen that it's possible to take an idea and be willing to wrestle with it and to launch it and give it a try.
Bring it to reality.
And even if it doesn't produce, I guess part of it's like, what is failure? I mean,
failure is not ever starting. And
that hurts sometimes because there are a lot of things I haven't started that I should probably have started. Failure isn't trying and messing up or having to reset or iterate your plans or try again. That's not failure. Failure is never trying. And I think
this brings us to a good point.
Yeah.
You should try.
Mm-hmm.
And we do think that becoming an innkeeper, if you will, a short-term rental proprietor is a very, very good way to move into a more independent life, a more entrepreneurial life, a more financially independent life, and a more productive family, and a more hospitable family, and hospitable life. And so we're going to do a series of webinars in which we address sort of the common objections and the common questions, and any custom questions that anybody has in relation to short-term rentals.
Getting started.
Some basic information about how to get started, but a lot of just addressing people's specific questions and common questions about why they should do it, what the financial realities are, what the other realities are. Because we've been doing this for a decade now. More than a decade? A decade. A while. And so check on the show notes. We'll have that. And we'll also have some other, all of the links that are required to do such a thing, get such a thing going. So, and we would encourage you to do it. Can you think of any other parting things to say?
I said a lot of things.
You've said a lot of things.
I liked this one.
We didn't have any dead space in the conversation. We'll require no editing, really. There's no... even if we put the AI to work, like shoving words together, like the AI is going to be like, that was easy and done. Becky was involved. Booyah. Okay. Well, I guess that's the end of it because Becky's not saying anything because she only needs, this is the funny thing, some people have a silence tolerance of 3, 4, 5 seconds if you're on the phone with them. There's got to be a long pause before they go, well, I guess we can get off. I'll talk to you later. Becky has about a quarter second of silence, and then she just says something that changes the subject or something. You can never get off the phone with her. One time, actually, it's not right to say that I talked to Becky for an hour because I didn't say anything to Becky for an hour. Literally said nothing for an hour. And she just kept going and going and going, just like this podcast. We'll see you guys next time. I am. Let me talk to me. I love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of the Stay at Work Home is brought to you by HeartlandBunkies.com. Come check out our full line of small cabin kits that can be easily assembled by a few friends or family in just a weekend for extra space for meaningful connection, or extra income, or a home office, a homeschool room, or whatever.